Very unlikely that you are familiar with all of the requirements and all of the intricacies of the PCI data security standard. You will fail. So don't do it.
Made Daily. Hello and welcome to the Made Daily podcast. I'm John Michael Thomas.
I'm Pierre Hegeman.
Made Daily covers our favorite stories online, from tech to social media.
Our expert thoughts and opinions on information security, web design, and development.
And other random stories from across the internet. This week's episode of the Made Daily podcast is brought to you by Cinemechanics, the premier camera and lens rental house in Minneapolis. When you're shooting your next film, commercial, or popular streaming platform, TV series, Cinemechanics will ensure your project stays next level.
And Made Daily version 5, the all-in-one secure website builder with built-in data collection tools and secure customer portals.
And one of our way back internet favorites this week, HBO Voyeur.
Today we're going to be talking about PII, otherwise known as Personally Identifiable Information, or information that connects you, an individual, or connects to your identity, right? So things we often think of as PII are like your name, your address, phone number, email, maybe social account information. Those are typically what are called non-sensitive PII, right? So everybody knows, if somebody gets access to your name, it's unlikely that they could use that to impersonate you. Now we have more sensitive PII, like secret information. So think of your social security number, your bank account info, your passport, driver's license number. And then we have a category of things that you may not think of as PII, but actually can be used to identify you or even find out where you are. And one of those that I really like to call out for people, because you probably may not be aware of it, is metadata in the photos that you take on your phone, especially if you tend to post to online media. By default, if you have location services turned on in your phone, that will get tagged in your photos. So there's actually GPS coordinates embedded in the photos, and if you post those online, people can use that to find out exactly where the photo was taken. And if it's taken around your house or in your neighborhood, they can find out where you live, which, depending on your risk profile, could be a very bad thing for you. So one thing that I always tell people to do is go into your settings. So depending on your phone, for example, in an iPhone, you can go to settings, go to privacy and security, location services, camera, and tap never, right? Turn that off so you're not saving location data in your photos. And I think that's a really good thing for everybody to do, especially if you tend to post your photos on.
And also, it's checking in places. I mean, if you want to let people know where you are, or, there's been numerous situations where somebody stalked another person because they've been just letting the phone track every place they go. And again, and that's also, all that tracking is bad.
Yeah, so I would recommend, it's a bit of a pain to do, but I always turn off the GPS on my phone unless I'm actively using the GPS. First of all, for that reason, because the phone will auto notify places sometimes, or depending on the app, right? It might be tracking where you are even if you're not using the app. Facebook is particularly bad about that. It's always tracking where you are even if you don't have the app open. So I always turn off location services. It is kind of a pain, right? Because you have to turn it on when you want to use the navigation. But for me, it's worth the trade-off to not have my location being broadcast to the internet all the time. That I think everybody should do is check your social profiles, right? Like especially Facebook, because Facebook is particularly bad about privacy. Make sure that everything is set to default private, unless you want to share your stuff publicly, which is totally fine. Just be aware that that's happening, right? If you don't expect your posts to be public, just make sure that they're set to private or friends only so that you're not accidentally sharing location information or things that can be used to track you down or impersonate you uh, unintentionally.
Well, and also I would add that as we move into this world where we're all sharing everything online, um, locking your stuff down best you can. I mean, anybody can find your address. They can just go look in a public record search and find your address. And so, if you're really out there, that's something you may want to look into, like figuring out a way to put that in a company or somewhere else. Just because there have been multiple, issues of cyber stalking and people being doxxed.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways for people to find out where you live. But probably the most common are going to be people very often, especially you know stalkers, cyber stalkers, and people who are versed in this kind of nefarious tracking of people. They often look at the photos because they know about that, and public records, like you said, John. And it's very unfortunate, I think, that property tax information is public, um, because it makes it really easy to find who lives in a certain place, right? You just look it up, it's publicly available. But there are some things that we can do to protect ourselves, right? We've gone over a couple. I think making sure your social posts are private if you intend them to be, making sure you strip the metadata out of your photos. There's apps you can do that. And then, preventing, like I talked about, preventing the phone from recording your location is a really good one. In a previous episode, we'll talk about it again, but you can freeze your credit, right, to prevent, and that it may not prevent all identity theft, but it will prevent people from being able to open accounts in your name, being able to get loans or apply for services on your behalf. One thing that also, speaking specifically to PII, that people don't often know about is it's very, very common practice for attackers or adversaries to aggregate multiple pieces of potentially non-sensitive PII to create a full profile or specifically identify an individual. It doesn't take a whole lot of information to be able to identify you uniquely as an individual. So I think it's it's good to be aware. We can't always be worried all the time about, oh, is my information out there? Yes, your information is out there. I think it's just good to be aware of it and to kind of take steps when you're sharing stuff to just know that not everybody on the internet who may be looking at this has your best interests at heart. When I was doing pen testing, Facebook is an absolute treasure trove of information about people and organizations, and you can use that to build entire profiles. You, if you have access to somebody's Facebook posts, you can build word lists that they may use for passwords. You can, and not just passwords, but the the less secure alternate version of the password that I like to say when people ask for those security questions, like what was your first dog? What was your, I hate those because it's it's often like literally public information, especially if people um, don't guard their social posts, right? Pet names, it's the worst, right? So better yet, companies should just use hardware two-factor or some other way of verifying identity so you're not asking for easily obtained information. When if you're thinking about the mind of the attacker, when you're trying to say you're pen testing a system, or if you're attacking, you're looking for information about the organization. You're looking for anything that might get you a way in, and that could be email addresses for spear phishing, right? So I may craft an email specifically for the CEO of an organization because I found out their name and their relationship on LinkedIn, right? So I know people that they know, and I know the things that they're interested in, so I can craft a specific email to them that has a high likelihood of um, getting an interaction, right? And social engineering is a very common way to gain access to an organization, where I'll call somebody and ask them about, you know, say one thing. you may you may not even think about this, but so say I know where you work, and I can call and I can say, hey, I'm thinking about applying for a job at your place, but I really like Indian food. Are there any good Indian restaurants in the neighborhood, right? And you say, oh yeah, there's this place and this place. We go there all the time. Now I know where you eat lunch, right? So I can go there. I can bring my portable scanner and grab your ID card. Now I have access to the building. So things like that are, you got to be careful who you tell and what you tell, and just be aware that there's, it's possible to combine pieces of information to use that.
I think you maybe listed it at the beginning, but I want to bring it up again in the context of being a business collecting people's information. And so, PII is personal identifiable information, right? So credit card, date of birth, driver's license, financial information, full name, gender, mailing address, medical records, passport information, place of birth, race, religion, social security number, of zip code. Why this is important though is there's so many businesses that ask for this stuff, that even have their own records based on your own social security number, which is a practice that literally should stop. They can
Yep.
they can have a database that can assign a unique ID or an account number to people instead of using social security numbers. Now, this is a practice that has slowed, but still, like,
Yeah.
you don't need to collect all of this information from people just because it was on a default form you had from some previous work, previous business, place of business. And the thing that we always stress is that, again, when you're giving this information to somebody through their website, is it secure? That's number one. Is it on an SSL site, right, Pierre? And then the second level would be, is it actually encrypted? And then once it's
Right.
once it's submitted and it gets to the party receiving the information, is it actually protected on the servers within the organization? And a lot of times we don't even know. We give our information, we're trusting this place. And I think one of the things for the future here is, like, being more mindful of who you're giving your stuff to and why, right?
So talking about social security numbers just for a second, the reason social security numbers are used so often is because it is probably the only unique identifier that most most everybody in the country has, right? And it's
Yeah.
very unfortunate that that's the case, because it is tied to your retirement, and it can't be changed, right? So that makes it a very bad unique identifier, right? If it has to be secret, and it's commonly used, and it can't be changed. This is a terrible combination, right? If you have a commonly used unique identifier, it should be easy to change, easy to rotate. If somebody finds out about it, you should be able to change it. You can't. I guess technically it is possible to change your social security number, but it's extremely difficult, and nobody ever does it, right? Um, Better would be to have some kind of separate national identifier, but getting that out to 400 million people is it would require an act of Congress, um, and yeah, so it's unfortunate that we're using social security number, but since we are, the things like John, you were saying before, the things that you want to watch out for when you're dealing with a business is, how are they collecting sensitive information, how are they storing sensitive information, and how are they using sensitive information, right? You don't, and it is possible you can refuse to give people your social security number. They cannot force you to give it to them. They can say, we're not going to do business with you, but then maybe that's a good thing, right? I find dentists are particularly bad about using social security number, and then they print it on their invoices, and then they give it out to you. It's terrible. I mean, why do you have my social security number printed on this receipt? Um, so I
It's because it's poorly designed software asking the question, or someone within the organization creating the software not thinking about the fact is like, because the point is, do you need the social security number to do your business? And in most cases, the answer is no.
in in almost every yes, the only time you should collect the social security number is if you're doing either a background check or a credit check, right? That would be the only time you should need to do that. Um, and there are businesses who have a legitimate need to do that, though I would argue in that case, collect the number when you need it, use it, and destroy it, right? You don't want to have that sitting on your systems because it is a business risk to your organization to have that information. Nobody wants their name in the news saying, you know, company X has lost 100 million social security numbers, right? That's terrible PR. So use it when you need it, and then get rid of it. If you have to store it, then store it encrypted, and encrypted preferably in a way that your your provider, whatever software provider you're using, they shouldn't be able to access that, right? If they can access it, then they're adding to your business risk, right? That if they have a data breach, then your data is lost. If it's encrypted
And
and only you can access it, then you're safe.
and
Yeah,
that's encrypted for
correct.
the business collecting the data. It's not stored in a file folder in a drawer, you know. I mean, that's not encrypted. That's maybe safer, but
No,
it
but
should.
yeah, I actually don't have. I have less of a problem with that if my social security number is written down and stored in a locked cabinet in the office. It's actually much harder to access because you would need physical access to the building itself, right? it, what I what I don't want is it's sitting unencrypted on a database on AWS, and somebody, anybody with enough time can brute force that password and get in and start dumping all those records, right? Or even worse, we've seen Excel spreadsheets just publicly on the internet, and you can tell Google specifically search for Excel or PDF documents that have the word finance in the title, right? Google will do those searches for you, and you know it's literally gonna, if you have your stuff on the internet like that, people will find it.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up that is again sensitive, which we see businesses in a very vulnerable position, is collecting a credit card. And I get
Ugh.
it; they charge cards. They want a card on file to store that card. Um, Again, if they are getting it on a piece of paper and storing it in a cabinet, that's one thing. If they're collecting it online through an insecure form or somewhere where multiple people have access, all it takes is it to be in that database record online. If it's not encrypted, somebody can find it, which is really bad form and is a very common practice, unfortunately.
Well, so there is a very specific set of industry standards and requirements that are put out by the card brands, and it's called PCI, right? The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. And they specifically say that you cannot do that. And if you do, then they can shun you. They can say you can't use the Visa network or the MasterCard network or whatever, or they can jack up your processing fees so that it becomes much more expensive for you to charge cards. So if you have to charge credit cards, my single biggest recommendation would be to use a dedicated payment service. Use a service
Okay.
that is PCI compliant, that is designed for that. Do not roll your own. Do not collect credit card numbers and store them yourself. That is a recipe for disaster. Don't collect credit card numbers because as a business owner, it is very unlikely that you are familiar with all of the requirements and all of the intricacies of the PCI data security standard. You will fail. So don't do it. Give that to somebody else, let them handle it. For example, the three-digit number on the back of the card, I've seen clients capture that information and store it. That is absolutely not allowed by PCI. You cannot store that ever. And so they're in that instance, they're in violation of PCI and at risk of not being able to process credit cards at all, right? So
So the
don't
so the
collect
options.
and
Mhm.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, so the options are using like a Stripe or some other payment gateway where you can create um, ways to bill them recurring or bill them as one-offs with invoices um, or just invoice and hound them for payment. Um, and you could
Yeah,
also,
so
if you're an industry where you just need to collect a deposit, you can just have a general deposit key through an e-commerce thing. Well, go submit the deposit. We got your deposit on file now, and it's not your card on file. It's you got your deposit on file.
right. Yeah, and most software, if you're using a billing software or something, they should have a way to, it's called tokenize, right? To take the credit card number, then they turn it into some other random thing that's only usable by you, but it's not the original credit card number. You don't have any record of that. So then the credit card token, in addition to the access credentials that you have for that service, can be used to do future charges or subscriptions or recurring charges or whatever you want to do. Um, and if your software doesn't tokenize, then probably find a different software. That would be my recommendation because it is enough of a risk, and the credit card companies are strict enough about PCI that it's just not worth the risk to the organization to do that on your own.
One other just personal thing I would recommend for people is, especially if you're starting a business, get a credit card. If you are an individual using a debit card, don't use a debit card. Get a credit card if you need to make purchases online because credit cards come with some level of fraud protection where debit cards do not. And I've heard too many stories of people having their bank accounts drained because there was a fraud thing. Now the banks are getting better at that, so it gets slowed down or stopped. But you don't necessarily get the money recovered if it comes off of a debit card, and so that should just be. I don't even know why they issue them anymore. They're kind of pointless. Um, so use a credit card, not a debit card for online purchases. This is kind of following on, Pierre, you were talking about this a little bit, which is, so can you lock, was a question of like, yes, you can freeze your credit, but can you actually freeze your social security number? And I didn't know that this was actually possible. Sounds like a really big pain if you got to call into the Social Security Administration. But Pierre, why don't you break it down for us?
Yeah, so to recap, in addition to locking your credit, which prevents somebody from doing a financial check on you and opening accounts, you can also lock your social security number, which prevents electronic access to your social security profile, right? So what this will do is it will prevent, for example, background checks. They won't be able to do a background check based on your social security number because they can't get a record back from the Social Security Administration. It also would prevent access to any government benefits, right? So if you have been a victim of tax fraud or um, or specifically tax identity theft or employment identity theft, this could be a good thing for you to do. Or if you just are very security minded and out of an abundance of caution, you want to lock it. You can do it by either calling the Social Security Administration, or, like I said before, enrolling in the E-Verify, and then there's just a toggle where you can lock your Social Security number. The E-Verify option actually isn't so bad because then you can unlock it via their web app or their app, which you can then do if you needed to apply for benefits or if you needed to apply for a new job or whatever, but then it keeps it locked the rest of the time. Um, yeah, and yeah, so I think that's about it for that one. It can be used as an additional control around your identity. It's probably, I would say, for most people, locking your credit is probably sufficient.
Yeah.
But if specifically you have, somebody's filed a tax return in your name, or as as applied for government benefits, then it can be very valuable. And I think it's good to know that that is available as an option.
Yeah.
It only is going to work for people who actually follow through and check with the Social Security Administration.
And when your credit's locked, it's a bit of an inconvenience, when you're like, oh, I can open a credit card at this clothing store and get, 25% off or whatever. You're not going to be able to do those instant checks without getting that unfrozen. But probably better to err on safety than the spur of the moment credit card
Yeah, that's probably not a good idea to
promo.
do anyway, with with how credit scores work, right?
Yeah.
You want to have a few really old credit cards, right? That's going to be the best way to keep your credit score high.
Except the stupid don't get a fee credit card, one with a fee, because then you have to keep paying that damn fee every year or calling them to waive the fee, and that's one of your oldest credit cards. That's my one advice there. That's the biggest scam. Those fee cards are the biggest scam, but you can't get rid of them because they may affect your credit. Do you remember this HBO Voyeur Project at all, Pierre?
I don't. I might have been out of the
Uh,
country for this one, but yeah.
this came out in like around 2007, and um, being a guy, being in an interactive agency and always looking at immersive experiences, this was quite impressive at the time. And unfortunately, you can't play it and have the actual experience anymore. There's a YouTube video we'll share with you. But what was really cool was they had it was like a multi-channel experience with a website, mobile content, and then they had a show premiering on HBO itself. Uh, and then they had this like on the ground experience in New York where they basically projected the interior of a building on a building, so it looked like a cross section of like I think it was like 9 apartments in the stairwell going up the inside, and 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 then people had like could use their phones and stuff and have this like immersive experience in real life.
Hmm.
My option for it was I got this link. I'm like, what is this thing? It started with like the binoculars and the blinds, and it reminded me of like it was a totally derivative of Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock film. Little binoculars and the blinds open up, and then you'd see this cross section of these like 6 apartments and the stairs going up the inside, and you could um, click on different apartments and watch the different story threads play out. So
Hmm.
everything was sort of in a little bit of a loop. But then you could dive kind of deep and you could figure out why is this woman dressed in this bathrobe all the time?
Hmm.
And you start to learn that there's guys coming up after she sends her husband and kid away for the day. And then there's this other couple having a baby, and there was this other couple doing construction work and getting in a fight with the neighbors up above, and they cut through the floor, and it was really a fun um, type of thing. And I really liked it because I had made a project in college where I did hide and seek, 6 cameras, 6 points of view, and I had a little way to kind of look and change between the different things. But I picked this one. Go ahead. I'll come back to that.
I was just gonna say that it feels kind of like Mist, who we were talking about last time. It's sort of a similar kind of idea. So it sounds cool.
It's definitely a derivative of that sort of gameplay, and definitely, Rear Window, the movie. You're looking into these worlds, and it won a bunch of awards and stuff, and it was big spaceship and BBDO, and you can dig into it deeper and find the guy who did the production design for it because it was really well done. But it got me thinking about like this immersive content and how there's still so many opportunities to do stuff like that across social media platforms. And then recently I came across this. I don't remember. I'm blanking on the name of it, but there is like a sitcom happening on TikTok or Instagram where people are just posting these like little tiny series of their like lives, but it's all actors and it's all scripted type of thing. So I'm always kind of interested in this stuff and to see what might be coming and how we can leverage media and start looking at, it was an interesting way to have like an interactive film, which was what was neat about it. The other kind of thing was you could hear like people talking, but you really couldn't understand a whole heck of a lot because it was, kind of like you're from the point of view of across the street. But it's something I definitely would recommend trying to find a video or on YouTube or a recording of it. And it's not the same experience because you don't get to discover it for yourself as much because it's passive, but it's a pretty cool project.
Yeah, that sounds cool. HBO, they seem to be willing to kind of go out on a limb like that. If you look at, like that project and some of the stuff that John Oliver does on his show, where he'll just be like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna buy this random thing and donate it or something." I like that about HBO. It's cool.
I also thought it was neat because had been a while since the big breakout of BMW Films, which was I can't remember which agency that was, but that was early 2000s, and they had created a series of like action films with the cars and stuff. And so I always think that there's this opportunity for these brands to do this content, but the problem is it's hard to pull it off and do it well. And so it's exciting when, like when you got HBO and you got the whole HBO engine behind you and the commitment, you can do it, because I'm sure this was a lot of money, to make this. All right. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to check out any of these stories or topics, you can head over to themadedaily.com/blog. And if you have a story you'd like to share or a site you'd like reviewed, please leave us a comment.
And don't forget to subscribe.
Until next time.
Stay secure.
Made Daily.